We're talking about the original intent of those who ratified our Constitution. And they were wanting to live their lives as freely as possible. So they didn't want a government like they'd had in Europe that could rule them in all areas whatsoever and was tied in with a religious group that would force everyone to do what they wanted. And just so you know, I personally believe Jesus of Nazareth is the Christ, the Son of God. I believe God raised him from the dead. He's the Messiah. And basically, the Bible is the Word of God when you get it rightly divided. It's my personal belief. That being said, the churches, these big churches in Europe, they were as bad as the government, okay? Worse in so many cases. They got so political, so tied up in money, and just terrible, abusive people. Well, this is some of the things they were trying to avoid in this country. Not that they didn't believe in God, they did. And they believed the Bible was the Word of God. So many of them that's how they should live. That's historic. Okay, that's not me being religious. You can read that in history. This is the reason our country, when it went into the revolution, had the highest rate in the world of literate people. They did. There were so many people who could read. They passed out that pamphlet, Common Sense, and everybody read the thing, okay, because they could. But the reason they could read is because they were all reading the Bible. Their mamas and daddies and their grandparents had taught them to read the Bible. They thought it was important. If they kept what was in the Bible, then they were going to be okay. Their family was going to be okay. Their country, which at that time was their state, was going to be okay. That's what they believed. So many of them. And they were literate. They could read. And that because of their belief in that Bible. That's historic. That being said, what's happened is they're trying to control the belief of the people. So the government's getting involved. They're telling, well, we need to get involved. We're going to help. This is going to be good for you. So they took over the money. Alexander Hamilton knew exactly what he was doing in trying to get a bank. It wasn't constitutional. Okay, it's not a constitutional thing the federal government can get involved in. Okay, the way they did it, was Madison and Hamilton got together with Jefferson, and they had Madeira wine and a dinner. And Madeira wine was wine that came from an island, and because it was shipped in boats that got hot and cold, it ended up being fairly useless by the time it got to where it was going, so they started to enhance it with hard liquor. And that made it pretty good wine, I guess. And during that, they convinced Jefferson that they would give, at the time, the United States had not settled on where the capital would be. I think it was in New York at the time, and they still hadn't settled on where it would be. And the argument was back and forth. There's all kinds of places people wanted it, and they couldn't agree. One fellow said, well, we'll put it on wheels and we'll just roll it around. Maybe we can get away with doing that. Well, they convinced Jefferson that they could get the votes, the New York votes and the Yankee votes, to give him and his crew the capital in a place where gentlemen spoke with a southern drawl. And that ended up being in what we now call Washington, D.C. And what he did, though, the deal was that Jefferson, who knew it was not constitutional to have a national bank, which is what Hamilton wanted, and you can say, well, Hamilton got rid of all the debt, he got rid of all these problems. Well, you have to get rid of your problems. But you don't have to break the Constitution to do it. And the reason they wanted to have a national bank was to be able to control the loaning of money. And by that, control the interest, control the money, and use that to control people. If you can control the money, you have to have money to do business. You have to have money to keep the farm going. Okay? If you can control that money, you can control the people. And that's what they wanted to do with that. It's still done today. The Fed controls the money, and by that they're able to control much of what the people do. You can say, well, it's a good thing that the Fed does what it does. That's fine. What has to be done has to be done. But you don't want to use the federal government to do it, or else you're going to end up being slaves to that. We'll go on with this. I don't mean to beat the mule too much, even though it's dead. That being said, hopefully this is helping.